So, we've talked about the concept of microservices and what is the definition of microservices. We discussed various attributes such as decentralized governance, infrastructure automation, and more. But now it's time to understand where and how do we put all this together. In other words, what is the process of actually designing microservices architecture? So this is what we are going to talk about in this section. When designing microservices architecture, there is a process we need to follow. And what we need to know and must not forget is that designing microservices architecture should be methodical. Now, this, of course, is true for every kind of software and is applicable to any architecture, but with microservices, it's even more so. The worst thing that can happen when designing microservice architecture is to rush into development. Do not do that. Simply don't. One of my favorite phrases regarding microservices architecture, and one that I teach each and every client of mine, is this: plan more, code less. And believe me, this phrase holds a lot of truth. It's true for every software and extremely true for microservices. This methodology of planning first and coding later is critical to the success of the system. The more you plan, the more you think about the overall system mapping, the more you know what you are going into, the less you will code later. And of course, the less we code, the less bugs we create, and the less maintenance we have. So following this process, and I can't stress this enough, is critical to the project's success. So what is this process? Well, what you see in front of you is the typical architecture process. We discussed it in length in the Complete Guide to Become a Software Architect course, and actually, it's quite self-explanatory, and I don't want to dive into all of the steps. What I do want to do is focus on the steps that require special attention when designing microservices. And these steps are mapping the components, selecting the technology stack, and designing the services architecture. Now, note that I'm going to split the mapping the component step into two separate steps: mapping the components and communication patterns. Inter-service communication is extremely important in microservices, and it definitely deserves its own lecture. We have a lot to talk about this topic when discussing microservices. Okay, great. So this is what we are going to talk about in this section, and let's begin with the first topic: mapping the components.